The Monsters almost joined a very exclusive club in the AHL and fell one goal short. It's not Monday, but we're going to do a Monsters Tuesday today and talk a little bit about the NHL head coach situation. That's all coming up on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I also have to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers are going to get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Obviously, not a Monday, but we are doing a fake Monsters Monday, a Monsters Tuesday, I guess, is what we're doing. And of course, when we're doing a Monsters episode, we have to bring on one of my very favorite people. Deana Weinheimer is here, and we're going to talk all things Monsters. We're going to talk about the future Blue Jackets stars that played in this playoff run. We're going to talk about how impressive this whole run was for a very young and inexperienced squad. And we're also going to talk about Trent Vogelhuber because as of about 20 minutes before the recording of this episode, the Blue Jackets fired their coach. So we're going to talk about all of these things. So let's bring Deana into the studio and welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets, Deana. Let's talk about the Monsters, because though the season didn't end the way we wanted it to, I still think there is so much to like about what this playoff run did. What you saw from this group, the resiliency, they could have panicked in the first series, down 1-0 against Belleville. They could have panicked down 3-0 in the series against Hershey. They didn't. They clawed their way back into that series, took it to overtime in Game 7, ultimately fell one goal short of beating the behemoth Hershey Bears. How impressed were you by just the playoff run as a whole? Because I know that we talked kind of before it started, you were getting 2016 Lake Erie Monsters vibes from this team. Do you still think that? Like, are you still getting the same sort of vibes, even though they didn't obviously do the thing? You're muted.
I am so sorry. Anyway, yes, absolutely. Just 100%. This team was, I know I've said it to so many people at so many times, but there was something so incredibly special about this team. And I would still put them up against some of the best teams from Cleveland history, from AHL history. I mean, they almost unseated one of the, or maybe the second best, I forget where they actually rank, teams in the regular season ever in this Hershey Bears squad. It literally came down to an unfortunate overtime penalty for delay of game and from Jake Gaudette, and they just had issues getting cleared back out after that delay of game penalty expired. And then Garrett Rowe from Hershey ultimately sealed that one, but it was just a lucky bounce by Garrett Rowe. If any of the other OT games had a bounce go in Cleveland's favor, we could be talking about Cleveland being in Coachella Valley, or actually Cleveland would be coming back for their first home game right now. But yeah, my stance still stands. One of the best teams ever.
Yeah, it was so good to have, and this is maybe melodramatic of me, but it was really good to have meaningful hockey in the Blue Jackets organization, because it's been a minute. Obviously, the Monsters haven't made the playoffs in a couple of years. The Blue Jackets haven't made the playoffs since 2020. It's been kind of a miserable time to be a Blue Jackets fan, but I think that this Monsters team, if you are, a Blue Jackets fan that's invested in that kind of way, like, this gives you a lot of hope for the future, I feel like. I want to talk about some of the guys that, like, future Blue Jackets stars, but I also want to talk about some of the guys that maybe won't make it to the NHL or will never be, like, some of the guys that, for example, I want to talk about that fourth line of Josh Dunn, of Justin Pearson, of Alex Whalen. Because I know that we've talked a lot about how good that line was, but that line, for a fourth line, outplayed every other line the Monsters had. How surprised were you by that? And how cool was it to see guys like Justin Pearson, who is on an AHL contract? He's not under contract with the Blue Jackets. Josh Dunn, who has kind of struggled a little bit this season, I thought, and really came alive in the playoffs. Like, how impressed were you and how surprised were you that this line really kind of lit up the way that they did?
If you would have told me game 1 of the Belleville series that the top 4 scorers in the playoffs would be Justin Pearson, when talking in point totals through 14 games, Justin Pearson, Josh Dunn, David Jiricek, and Alex Whalen, I would have laughed and said, no.
Yeah, one of these things is not like the other, but
yeah, for sure. But pleasantly surprised by that group. I mean, that just goes a long way in showing, hey, whenever you give players like Josh Dunn, if you get him in the right situations with the right people, he can make magic. I mean, they've always used him as a face-off specialist, but what he created with Alex Whalen and Justin Pearson, normally you see Josh Dunn on more of a checking line, the more traditional fourth line player, but they have redefined what a fourth line can be. Those three and Trent Vogelhuber completely have redefined what fourth lines are. And 100%. I think in the best way possible.
Yeah, and I want to talk about Trent Vogelhuber specifically in a little bit, but I want to talk about a player that didn't show in the way a lot of us were expecting. Travis Wolanski really struggled this postseason, and he had flashes where he looked like he was getting it, and I was like, okay, he got that one, now he's gonna be ready to go. But I believe he only had, 4 points these playoffs, 4 or 5 points.
He had 3 goals and 5 assists for 8 points.
8 points, yeah, in 14 games. That is not a Travis Wolanski number. What was up with that? Is it just like the other team is targeting him because they know he's one of their best players and shutting him down? Is it like, do we think that he was nursing some kind of injury because that's how the postseason goes? Was it just bad luck? Sometimes it just happens. You have a cold streak at the worst possible time, or is it, option D, all of the above?
I don't. If I had to venture a guess, I wouldn't say it would have been injury, because he wouldn't have been throwing his body around like it was. Because, I mean, I've talked about this so many times before about how former head coach Mike Eaves always called Trey the angry little bowling ball. He put that on display in the playoffs. Now, granted, that did seem to go down as the series, as they would advance and all that. So maybe there was a slight injury there, but we did, like you said, we did see flashes in that game 7. He actually did score a goal. I'm saying actually like that because up until that point, he had only had 2 goals in 13 games. But yeah, I was genuinely shocked. I think part of it was he had only had 3 games of playoff experience heading into that point. To start the playoffs, one of his main line mates was Luca Del Belbaluz, who also struggled mightily with the playoffs in his first professional season. So I think it was a mix of maybe not the right line mates, the players on the other team hounding him. There was plenty of times where he was double teamed, if not more. And it just, things just did not work out for him. I mean, this was a guy that in 58 games in the regular season put up 60 points, was a plus 17. The only good thing I guess we could say is he did use the body a lot. He did, have a plus 5. He only had 3 penalty minutes. And actually, now that I'm looking, all of his goals were on the power play. So that just kind of goes to show, he was getting hounded a lot. He just needed that open space and unfortunately didn't get it in this postseason.
Yeah. I will say also, just to kind of to add to that, in terms of like bad puck luck or whatever, he did have the third most shots on the team. We had 35 shots on goal in 14 games, and only 3 of those went in. So shooting at less than 10% is always going to be rough, especially in a small sample size like this. But yeah, I'm like, I was expecting a lot more out of Fix-Wolanski than we got, which is really unfortunate because I mean, Locked On Blue Jackets fans know, everydayers know how much we love Trey Fix-Wolanski on this podcast, and we want him to be, the best possible TFW that he can be, and he just wasn't that in the postseason. I do want to talk about though a couple of players who were their best selves in the postseason and who are going to be potential future stars of the Blue Jackets. So we're going to talk about that in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, though, I've got to tell you all about FanDuel because it's summertime. Summertime means baseball. It means the NBA Finals. It means the Stanley Cup. And you can bet on all of that over on FanDuel. New customers are going to get $200 in bonus bets right now with any winning $5 bet. Just find the heaviest favorite you possibly can. Put $5 on it, like the Panthers winning tonight or the Celtics winning the final. And if you win, you get $200 that you can use to put on everything from finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and add a big win to your summer bucket list. Once again, that is FanDuel.com/locked-on. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We're talking about the Cleveland Monsters, and the season didn't end the way that any of us wanted it to, but there's still a lot to be proud of, and there's still a lot of excitement. And I want to look specifically at a couple of young defensemen. And we're going to start off. We're going to look at David Jiricek, who had 11 points in 14 playoff games for the Monsters this season. 3 goals, 8 assists, was just an absolute monster out there. Genuine #1 defenseman for them, especially when Jake Christensen went down with injury early in the postseason. This is what we needed to see from David Jiricek, I think, after kind of not necessarily a lackluster season, but he didn't have the impact at the NHL level that he wanted. And I think that kind of impacted his AHL season a little bit. He wasn't as dominant as he was the season before for, I think understandable reasons. Has this postseason changed how you look at David Jiricek in terms of his future as a Monster or his future as a Blue Jacket? Do you think, do you see David Jiricek in Cleveland in October?
I think that would depend a lot on what moves, if any, are made up top with the new GM, with Don Waddell. Because I have seen some speculation that maybe they might try to move, I forget who all was even involved in that, but a Bean or one of them,
Yeah, every day there's a new rumor. Oh, we're going to move Stamkos's contract. We're going to move Provorov's contract. We're going to move Bean. We're going to move Boquist, etc., etc. So
Provorov was the name I was trying to think of, and it just absolutely left me. All I could think about was his super fluffy golden retriever, because if anyone knows me, knows I have one and that I love dogs. Anyway, if they move one of those players, absolutely. I think what really benefited David Jiricek was, by the time the postseason hit, this was the highest level of the organization that was still playing hockey. So he didn't have that extra weight on his shoulders or, the mind space taking up. I want to be in the NHL. I deserve to be there. This was the only thing he had to focus on. And whenever he was able to get into that headspace and just focus on each game, doing his job, he was able to put up amazing points. I mean, 0.79 points per game, 36 shots, and he did fantastic. I mean, this is the player that in the final series, in the Eastern Conference Finals, scored twice in back-to-back games to send this into overtime. One of them was less than a minute to go. One of them was about 90 seconds to go. I forget it was Jake Christensen who did it the other time. I'm forgetting. All the games have run together.
They just kind of blend into one after a while.
Right. But yeah, he was a huge asset, and I think having Columbus not make the playoffs actually did him a lot of good. And he very well could be, but again, it all depends on if space opens up top with the Blue Jackets.
For sure. Let's talk about the other young defenseman that did not get as much ice time as David Jiricek, but Denton Mateychuk turned pro at the conclusion of the Memorial Cup, played, I think, 4 games for the Monsters in that tail end of the Hershey series, and 3 assists in 4 games, was a +5 on in those 4 games, and went pointless in his first game, and then had an assist in 3 straight, including, I believe, the primary assist on the game winners in Game 5 and Game 6. How impressed were you by this kid in his pro debut?
3 assists on 3 shots. Holy moly. I mean, the cool thing about Denton Mateychuk coming in is he almost seemed to have a settling presence on the defense whenever he came in. Immediately was running point on the top power play unit for Cleveland. He looked like he had been in this league for as long, if not longer, than, say, David Jiricek. He just looked completely comfortable with his game, the way he conducted himself, and everything was just, it looked every part of a seasoned professional. This kid is going to be something, and I was beyond impressed. Like, I was looking down at the ice and like, oh, that must be Jiricek, or that must be, insert another, let's say, like Jake Christensen once he came back into the lineup. Every time I looked down, impressed with the defender, 75% of the time, it was Denton Mateychuk.
Yeah, he looked like he was in his 5th pro season, and the motto of this offseason for Locked On Blue Jackets is we are tempering our expectations with basically everything. But it's so hard not to get super excited about a player like Mateychuk. I have a really good feeling about him, and I'm really glad that we got to see him kind of dip his feet in this short sample size of AHL postseason play. One more guy that I want to talk about, and you know who it's going to be because it's Locked On Blue Jackets, and we can't do a Monsters Monday without talking about Greaves. Far and away the MVP of this team for me. He was phenomenal. 8-5, had a shutout, a .926 save percentage, a 2.17 goals against average, and allowed 30 goals in 13 games for this team. As a guy that this was his first playoff experience at the pro level, like his third, really only his second full season as a member of the Monsters. He's still only, 23 years old. This kid's future just like it feels sky high. And again, we're tempering our expectations, but it's so hard to look at this kid and not see an NHL goalie down the line. Do you agree?
Yes, absolutely.
is the short answer. Yes.
I was trying to, think of, okay, tempering expectations, all of this, but with each season that he plays, he looks better and better and better. And it's just, I mean, it's so easy to root for a player like Jet Greaves. I mean, he never let the games get too big for him. I'm just thinking back to that game, I believe it was game 6, where Hershey scored with under a minute to go ahead. And that shot of the celebration where Hershey is celebrating and Jet is literally sprawled out like a starfish, face down. And you could just see it kind of almost like he felt disappointed, heartbreak, all that. But immediately, okay, Trent Vogelhuber calls timeout. Jet Greaves and the rest of the team brush themselves off. They come back, force overtime, win the game. You know, and Trent Vogelhuber said it earlier about him, that he approaches every single game the exact same way, whether it's the All-Star game in San Jose, a random Tuesday night in the middle of December, playing against the Toronto Maple Leafs in the NHL, or now a do or die situation for 4 games straight in the Calder Cup playoffs. He was so poised the entire time, and I would love to see him in the National Hockey League full-time, but I would be remiss if I didn't say
you do want to keep him a little bit.
I really want to keep him just a little bit longer, because let's get him, you know what, tempering expectations. I would just like to see him cook one more season and maybe move him up then.
Yeah. And that's kind of been my argument, has been I don't think he's ready to be a full-time NHL backup. I think you leave him in Cleveland, you let him play 40 to 50 games next season instead of him playing 20 to 30 at the NHL level. But yeah, it's again tempering expectations, but it's real hard not to be enthusiastic about this kid, especially when he came from basically nothing. That was we need a goalie, we'll throw him a contract, and he has really kind of grabbed that and run with it, which is really, really fun. We're going to take another quick break, and then when we get back, the Blue Jackets have an opening at the head coach position, and I know a guy that could potentially be in discussions for taking that job, so we'll talk about that in just a second here at Locked On Blue Jackets. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. Trent Vogelhuber has been, again, another big piece of the conversation this postseason for the Monsters. I watched, before Game 7, I decided to hype myself up, and I watched all of the Behind the Battle episodes for Cleveland that the Blue Jackets put together, and every single time Trent Vogelhuber was on screen talking, I was like, man, I would run through a wall for this guy. Like, if he told me to run into oncoming traffic, I probably would do it. Like that's the kind of guy he is. Again, to reference a joke made on Calder's Calling, which is the podcast that Deana and I do with Corey Swart over at the Calder Times. I would push my grandma down the stairs if Trent Vogelhuber asked me to. But again, he is very early into his coaching tenure. He's very young. I think he's 34, 35 years old. I don't necessarily think it's time for him to be in the NHL as a coach, but do you see him as a potential future option? I know we were talking about this a little bit off mic before we recorded, but is he a guy that they bring in to kind of, okay, you're the guy in X seasons, learn from the guys that we have now, and when you're ready, we'll bring you up? Is that kind of how you feel about Vogelhuber as a potential option for Columbus's coaching vacancy?
Not this season, but like you said, in future years, yes. I mean, Columbus has so many really promising young players. Like we already mentioned, Denton Mateychuk. We have, possibly Gavin Brindley might be, who knows, down in Cleveland next year. There are so many really high prospects that are getting ready to go pro. Why not have them down in Cleveland with Trent Vogelhuber, who has created this absolute fantastic winning culture, not only just a winning culture, but a culture where everyone is super close with each other and wants to play for each other. Like you always hear the cliche, oh, we have to battle, together. We have to do all this. But it's not a cliche here. It is truly how these players feel about each other. And that is all through Trent Vogelhuber's and his assistant coaches. It's through their hard work in establishing that. But again, he has only been coaching since the 2018-2019 season. He was an assistant coach with Cleveland up through the 2021-22 season. And remember, for what was it? 3 of those seasons, at least 2 of those seasons were cut very short and were kind of odd because of, well, we all know what was going on starting in 2020. But then he has only been a head coach in the American Hockey League for 2 years. He has no NHL coaching experience. And I just think it would be really good to have him cook down in the American Hockey League with a lot of these younger guys and then just kind of move them all up in a group. They already have that. They'll already have the chemistry together. They'll be joining players that have come up through Trent, in the past. And I just think it would make for an outstanding culture. And honestly, if Cleveland lets him go a la Jared Bednar, that would be a huge miss.
Yeah, no, I think I would have to fly to Columbus and find Don Waddell's house and be like, listen.
Chase him around with the slipper.
Just as kind of a more general note, I know that I talked in yesterday's episode a little bit about kind of potential coaching options for the Blue Jackets. Is there anyone in the AHL right now that you think that Don Waddell potentially has his eye on as a guy? I don't think it's necessarily, I think it's very unlikely that they choose a new, a first-time NHL head coach, because they've done that twice in a row now and it hasn't gone super well either time. So I think they're going to go with someone with more experience. But is there anyone coaching in the AHL right now that you're looking at as a potential option to make the jump up to the NHL?
I know what you want me to say.
No, I genuinely don't. I know that.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. But honestly, we would not be doing our jobs if we did not bring up Todd Nelson in Hershey. He has been around, I'm going to look real quick because it just seems like he's been around forever, and he does a fantastic job no matter what the Washington Capitals throw at him. He does it all. And I'm surprised that he's not, full-time in the National Hockey League. Okay, so he spent a part of a time mid-season in 2014-2015 as the Edmonton Oilers head coach, and he has done some assistant coaching jobs with the Dallas Stars, but primarily he's been in the American Hockey League. He has been coaching professionally since 2002-2003 season, so literally as long as I've been out of high school. It boggles my mind why he is not a full-time coach in the National Hockey League. I mean, he played there, albeit not a whole lot, but
I believe
he's
3 NHL games of experience.
Yeah. But he has plenty of other experience playing in the AHL, the IHL, overseas. He's won Calder Cups as a player and as a I'm losing my brain here. So not as a player, but as a coach. He's done so much. He's won Coach of the Year. If we're looking at just NAT or AHL coaches that may move up, he would be at the top of my list. Mainly because the other one I would have liked to have seen was in Rochester, and Buffalo already moved him up. So
yeah, he was a guy that was, again, definitely on my radar, and then Buffalo were like, well, I guess we'll take him. So
Yep. No, but going back to what we said about Trent Vogelhuber, I mean, I think no one needs to look further than Ryan Warsofsky, who was just named the head coach of the San Jose Sharks just a few days ago. as a good comparable. Just let him cook in the AHL, do some really good things down there, and don't do what who was it? Who were they with? Carolina, and let them, let him be poached away from the San Jose Sharks, and had him cook down there, for 2 seasons. Now he's their head coach, but yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Lots of options. I'm also going to throw Marco Sturm in there just because he's kind of come up as an option as well. Again, I talked about him a little bit on yesterday's episode, but just to kind of wrap up our thoughts for potential AHL coaches, I think you've got to have Marco Sturm in the conversation. But if people want more Monsters content, if they want more AHL content, where can people find you and your work online, Deana?
So they can find all of the written stuff at thecaldertimes.com. If you're on YouTube, you can see my X handle down there, Deana Weinheimer. And then also you can catch Jay and I on the Calder's Calling podcast. As long as the AHL season's going on, it's going to be weekly episodes on Wednesdays. Then after that, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see
what fun stuff planned for the off season.
Yeah. I don't know how
we'll
often
keep
that'll
that
be
a
coming.
Surprise for everyone. You can find me online at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find Locked On Blue Jackets at LO_Blue Jackets on Twitter, on Instagram. You can email me if you want to at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. At email.com is so funny. Sorry about that. lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, anything, thank you for making this your first listen of the day every day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms. We are over on YouTube and on SiriusXM. Thank you once again for listening. Thank you, Deana, for coming to chat Monsters, potentially for the final time this season, but we'll get you in the off season, I'm sure. Don't worry. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.